welcome everyone to the Society of Thoracic Surgeons Congenital Heart Surgery Database New Data Manager webinar for September. Today is September the 8th of 2022. So this is our second in a series of New Data Manager webinars. We had our very first Data Manager webinar around the same time last year. Just to know that if you obviously are very new to this role and you weren't with us last year, that webinar is posted out on the STS website for review as well. But again, just welcome everyone for joining us today for our New Data Manager webinar, second in our New Data Manager webinar series. Just a brief introduction real quick. First and foremost, my name is Leanne Jones, and I am the manager for the STS National Database for Congenital and General Thoracic Surgery. If you have not heard me before or you're new, I've been with STS for approximately, actually right at 3 years now. So prior to working for STS, I was at Duke Clinical Research Institute working on the congenital heart surgery database, on the congenital heart surgery database, as well as the general thoracic surgery databases. For about 19 years, I was more on the working more directly with the data managers. So it's nice to have you guys here with us today. Just to kick things off, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the introduction to STS. We covered these slides in our previous webinar, but just to give you a super brief introduction to STS and the databases, the Society of Thoracic Surgeons was founded in 1964, and the goal and purpose, mission statement of the society is to enhance the ability of cardiothoracic surgeons to improve the highest quality care through education, research, and advocacy. At this time, we have more than 7,500 members in 99 countries, and we have more than 65 employees in Chicago and DC. We also have a couple of remote employees, myself being one of those. I'm full-time remote. I'm here in North Carolina, and I believe Catherine, one of our other remote employees, I think Catherine's in Alabama. So a majority of our employees are housed and based out of Chicago. The first database was started in 1989 in response to what is now CMS. The databases were started because of malpractice lawsuits related to misperception on the risk associated with surgery. Also, the Joint Commission requirement of health systems to have a QA program used for surgeon recredentialing, as well as threats to reimbursement. Database accomplishments consist of improved patient outcomes and patient safety. We've developed clinical practice guidelines such as blood conservation and antibiotic usage, and also the STS National Database provides voluntary public reporting for sites who publicly report do tend to have better outcomes. The Congenital Heart Surgery Database commenced in 2003. As of today, we have 118 total sites in the Congenital Heart Surgery Database, 117 North American sites and 1 international. We currently have 64 anesthesia participants. We have 425 participating surgeons, as well as 667 anesthesiologists. And at this time, we have over 590,000 procedures for over 361,000 patients. To date, we have a 90.6% participation rate in our congenital public reporting. So again, that's just a brief super brief and high-level overview of the STS National Database. I wanted to take the opportunity to introduce you to the faces of the quality team, the quality and research team that works on the STS National Databases. Our Vice President of Quality is Donna McDonald. Our Vice President of Quality and Research Operations is Jane Hahn. We also have Carol Crone, who is the Director of the STS National Database. She handles all congenital, general thoracic, adult, and oversees INTERMACS and PDMACS as well. Catherine Holyfield is our National Database Manager for INTERMACS and PDMACS, and myself for general thoracic and congenital. Some other STS colleagues that you may have come in contact with or will be working with at some point in the future. We have Emily Conrad, and she is our STS National Database and Patient Safety Manager. Emily also, if you guys are very aware, also handles AQO. We also have Derek Steck. He is the Senior Manager for STS National Database Contracts. So if you have any questions about your participation agreements or anything as such, Derek is your point of contact for all things participation agreement and contracts. Sydney Clinton is our Quality and Database Operations Manager. Many of you may have worked with her on TQI or STS Public Reporting. We have Banu, Carol, I don't know how to say Banu's. I always butcher her last name. Yagasi. She is our Quality Measures Manager. We have Addie Dolan. Addie is our Quality Programs and Operations Manager. And then also doing the majority of the presenting today, we have Chsd Wellness, our core group and Congenital Heart Surgery Database Consultant. And Chsd is out of Phoenix Children's Hospital. And then also we have Leslie Wacker, one of our core group members, and Leslie is out of the University of Michigan. I did want to go over briefly who's on the call today. On the call from STS, we have myself, Carol Crone, Chsd, Emily, and Leslie. All right, with that being said, I'm going to turn things over to Chsd and Leslie and just let them take over from here on out. So Chsd, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Leanne. So as Leanne said, it'll be Leslie and I doing this exciting talk today for new data managers to the CHSD database. I'm going to focus a little bit on workflow and kind of a day in the life of a data manager. And then Leslie's going to take it over and do a live demonstration of the Harvest tool. So we've gone over Harvest tools in the past and on previous webinars, but of course they're very static and just images that have been dropped into the slides. But Leslie is graciously going to walk us through actual kind of live looking at things and how you can work your way through the tools in preparation for Harvest, since we know the countdown is on. Next slide. Okay, so I'm often asked how it is I do my job, or what is my workflow? How do I do what I do? When do I do it? And how do I make it all happen? This is incredibly difficult to put into slides. So if anyone has ever tried to go to their boss to say, I need a new job description or things like that, this is really difficult to do. And once you do it, it may even help you get a promotion or things, because it's amazing what we all do as data managers. So of course, first and foremost, we abstract data. But in addition to that, we validate, we clean up our data, we submit the data by deadlines driven by our database, the Society of Thoracic Surgeons. We then have to interpret the reports that come back. We become the data experts in our centers. And so interpreting this for surgeons, for administrators, and anyone else in the chain of command. We then present this data in various places, committees. So whether in the presence of, like, you're in a boardroom giving a presentation, all the way down to providing maybe numbers to a report. You query data for perhaps QI projects or research projects or someone else's work that's going on within the hospital. You may even do some data analysis as a part of this work. And then of course, being a part of quality and process improvement projects. Next slide. So where do you start? How do you break this down to say, okay, today, what do I do now that it's Thursday? How do I attack my job? Or I'm brand new, I'm expected to do a lot of things. So how do I go about putting this together? Next slide. First and foremost, I think the most important thing that drives all of these other functions are the fact that we need accurate and timely data. So whether this is to your local program or whether this is to STS, you need to keep up on timely data, but not sloppy data. It's got to be accurate data. So I think that that's probably the crux of all of this, is that we have to have the data, we have to be able to use it, which sometimes creates I would say, competing priorities between deadlines for STS, or what you need to do for STS, versus what your local program needs. And so it can be a challenging balancing act that will take you some time as a new data manager to kind of fall into or find your place, or perhaps set boundaries if needed within your program. Next slide. So the way I organize my work, now in full disclosure, I no longer collect all of the data for the STS database, but I did it for many years, multiple programs over time. And so training someone new, passing the reins to someone else, I really had to put this to paper to write a job description for what I need this person to do. And so I put this together many years ago, but then made it colorful for all of you. So it's really the who, what, and when of how I organize my life. So the who is identifying your surgical cases. This can be, very simple in your program. It can be very difficult in your program, depending on, what's already in place. And you may even have to get involved in that process. And then the what data fields are required for you to collect for the database, or to report out locally, or in addition to what's collected in the database. And then of course the when do you collect each of the data fields that are required? Next slide. So let's start with a little bit with identification of your surgical population. It seems easy, we should be able to know who goes to the OR. It can be difficult depending on how your program works or what kind of tools that you have. Is it electronic? Is it manual? How do you know about changes that occur in the OR schedule and things like that? So sometimes it can be a pain or a chore to figure this out, but you want to identify a gold standard source for who goes to the OR or has a procedure anywhere in your hospital that is eligible to put into the database. And so you need to have a source that is reliable and reproducible, so that every day patient A shows up on this report if you run it for that surgical date. This may be an electronic OR log, perhaps a report built in IT. There are many ways to do this. Some people may have still, kind of handwritten books sitting in the OR physically that you go down and look at, but you need a way that is both reliable and reproducible. This is not only to cover you for your database audit, but it's really for your work and your workflow, and it will save time if you are able to create something that is your gold standard that you use. I would also suggest having a secondary source as a double check. Now, I don't run my primary resource and then turn around and run a secondary source. I usually run the gold standard. I have an OR log report that I run. I can put in the surgical dates, and then probably quarterly, I would go back and run the secondary source to make sure nobody slipped through that didn't hit that gold standard source. And with that, as a part of my workflow, if somebody popped up on that secondary source that wasn't in my gold standard, I now probably should work back with IT to say, hey, how did we miss this case? Or does it make sense that we missed this case? And of course, this may update over time. OR logs change, your EHR changes, IT reporting changes. And so you always have to make sure you're a part of this in your institution. And depending on how your institution is set up, this can be quite challenging. Next slide. So what fields are required for data collection? So we know that we have a data collection form that we follow for the STS database. So that's great. We know what we're collecting. However, I now need to find a reliable and reproducible source in my health system to get all of the information that's required in the database. And of course, EHR documentation is probably the tool that we lean on the most, but a lot of people have some IT reports created and things like that to find certain fields. This is very, every program needs to come up with ways to collect this data. And it's amazing when you talk to people, oh, I have this report or that report, and you can go back to your hospital and get certain things, created for yourself. And it kind of helps you. So I think thinking of Iqvo and all the announcements made about that, how important it is to be able to network with other people to say, hey, how do you do this? Or where do you find this? This is a field I struggle with. What do you have in place to find this field? Of course, you can utilize all of your resources. So there is the training manual that's out there, knowing that it does get updated monthly, but there's guidance for all of the fields as well as the available definitions. And if there's any confusion, I think one of the biggest time sucks that I am so guilty of is that I go down a rabbit hole. I can't answer a question. I can't figure out, is it this or that? And I perseverate over it for the next 2.5 hours, which is really a waste of my time when at the end of that 2.5 hours, I still have the same question that I had 2.5 hours ago. So the best thing you can do is go, okay, this is confusing. I can't figure this out. I'm going to stop right here and I need to move it to the next line of resource. Is that talking to your surgeon? Is that talking to fellow data managers? Is that submitting a question to to the FAQ portal, whatever it is, there are resources available to you both, probably within your institutions as well as outside of your institutions, and you want to start engaging those early. Next slide. When do you perform your data function? So many of us carry, a lot of roles within our institutions that change over time. And so an organized plan is really important, but it's very program dependent as to when you complete your functions. You obviously have STS database deadlines, but we also know that you're doing reporting and data querying and analysis and interpretation all along the way within your local institutions. And so you have other deadlines to meet. And so when you perform your data functions really depends on your program. And so your program doesn't look like my program, doesn't look like the next program. And so you have to really know your team and what's needed and what's required. And they're going to come to you today and tell you, I need this. And then 3 weeks from now, they need 3 more fields added to that. And 3 weeks from now, they add 4 more fields to that. And so it will always change over time, but understand that how you collect your data and when you collect it and when you clean it and when you turn it out into reports is very program dependent. It may be dependent on resources. Are you one person doing all of this in a high volume program? You're probably very stressed and it's very difficult. If you're perhaps a low volume program and there are 3 of you doing these functions, that's a great world to live in. And I would like to work at your program. It may be dependent on how great your EHR is, or not just how great it is, how great you're able to get data out, or how quickly you can get IT resources, perhaps to create a specialized data tool for you in the EHR. And so sometimes, those kinds of things can be great ways to get data out quickly. And then also data needs. How hungry is your program for data? Like, is there a lot of research going on and they want to use the most, recent data you have in your database? Or maybe your program is not as data hungry and you don't have as many, competing priorities and things, which is somewhat a great world to live in, I guess, if you're employed there. But on the other hand, you really do want a program that's engaging and using this data so that, your role is important, and not just for external database reporting, but internally to your institutions as well. So when you perform your data functions, you can do real-time data collection. You can do all your data collection post-discharge from your program, or even database discharge, or a combination thereof. So next slide. So when we look at real-time data collection, this is where you're collecting, simultaneous data collection as the patient moves through your operative course. So they have surgery and they discharge, and you're collecting data. Like you come in today and read yesterday's progress notes and yesterday's evaluations and yesterday's testing and whatever. I think this works well if you are a smaller volume program or don't have a lot of people asking to use your data constantly. Like maybe that's something that's very achievable. If you're the only person in a very large program with high data needs, then I think this is not probably going to be successful to you. Now, obviously there are advantages and disadvantages to doing this. The advantages are you have as complete of a data set as possible available for anything locally, research, QI work, whatever. So I mean, there are huge advantages to that. There's not a lag in your data. However, disadvantages are it's very time consuming, very labor intensive. And remember, some of our fields are not available to code until a patient discharges from the hospital and or even long-term care or another acute care hospital. So things that come to mind are mortality status or your neurologic deficit persisting at discharge. You can't code anything about that neurologic deficit until that patient leaves your facility. And so, paying attention to those things, there may be a lot of rework then as you do real-time data collection. Next slide. So if you look at collecting all of your data after hospital discharge, so you never enter anything until the patient goes home, I think this is a successful way to do this until you have those pesky patients who like to stay for a very long time. And, I think of some of my, very severely premature patients who might stay 8 or 9 months in my facility. And so while this is very efficient and I can get into everybody's chart one time and never have to go back to it, and that's really great, I would say a disadvantage is I can't report out to my surgeons how many procedures they did if I'm not entering anything into the database until these patients discharge. 8 or 9 months later. And so there's also no way to identify opportunities for improvement in a timely manner. And I don't know about you, but I'm asked this all the time. What are you seeing in the data? What can you tell us? And, I'm able, sometimes anecdotally, sometimes because I'm running numbers constantly and things, I can say, gosh, our length of stay is up. Maybe our length of stay is up by a stat category or by an age group. Should we drill down on this? Is it something that's just happening right now because our patients are sicker? Or is we lost our discharge coordinator and we're, in the process of hiring a new one? And so you will lose this inability to identify any opportunities, whether in process or quality of care, if you're not entering any data until after hospital discharge. Next slide. So then we look at hybrid data collection, and this is where you're able to collect specific data points at time points during the patient's operative course. So you've got to really be organized and know what your team needs, what your hospital needs, at any point in time, and know what fields then to perhaps tackle first. I know I have to give a volume report to the surgeons every month about the previous month. So I need to always have the basic information that they want. And of course, they want procedures, surgery date, the diagnosis, the stat category, right? That maybe just a basic report that you give to them for volume or an op type. So I've got to have those fields entered no matter what for every case. Maybe the ICU wants extubation, how long by stat category to get to the patient, do our median time to initial extubation following a procedure. So now I know I need procedures as well as the extubation date and time. Surgical morbidity, so complications. Now, I don't have people asking me for a lot of the minor complications, but the major complications, especially those associated with re-intervention, I'm asked for all the time readily, as well as mortality. So these are the things you might want to focus on first. There are many, many more that many programs will do differently. These are the big things that come to mind for my own program. So disadvantages to this, I don't really see these as disadvantages. It requires you to be incredibly organized and in constant communication with your team, whether it's the ICU, your quality department, research people, surgeons. And so understanding everybody's needs and being able to prioritize those needs and set boundaries where appropriate. Next slide. So as I break down, what is my workflow for collecting data on one patient? So we know we have time points, and you have an OR date, a hospital course, which we hope is small, and then a hospital discharge. Next slide. But we have to marry this with our data collection time points and the fields that are required. So we know we have a whole pre-op time period that comes into play because of things like pre-op factors and birth history and things that go into prior to even getting to the OR. Now we come to the OR, have our hospital course, and not only do we have a hospital discharge, but sometimes our patients don't go home. They have to transfer to other centers, whether acute care or chronic care, and then we get into all the peskiness with the database discharge date. Next slide. So I think about what is required then for data collection at these different time points for any one patient that comes into my facility for surgery. So pre-op factors, birth history, all your syndromes and anatomic abnormalities, chromosomal abnormalities, demographics, all this is available pre-op. And then of course you have the case that occurs. And now you finally have a surgery date, a surgeon name, all the operative fields, perfusion fields, anesthesia fields, blood products, medications delivered, and complications, anything that happens in the OR. This is the biggest bulk of the data collection actually occurs in the OR. Makes sense, it's a surgeon's database. And so what they're doing in the OR is probably the biggest bulk of what it is that we are collecting. So when do you collect this for a patient? Again, looking at that hybrid data collection workflow, you need to determine what's really important to your program. And when do you sit down and do this? Now, I've had people ask me, do you know a patient's going to have surgery tomorrow? Do you go in today and do all of this pre-op stuff, pre-op factors, birth history, and knowing that the surgery is not going to happen until tomorrow? I think that that's a very personal, it's a personal question that I don't want to answer. No, I think that it's very dependent on your program. I do not do this because I would spend so much time doing all this pre-op work for someone who's going to test positive for COVID today and not going to have surgery tomorrow. Someone who's going to come in through the ED tonight and something else has happened and they're not going to have surgery tomorrow. Or the surgeon has an emergency and we're going to do a transplant. We're going to cancel all the procedures that were supposed to occur tomorrow and perhaps even Monday. And so I'm a large volume program with a lot of variability, and my OR schedule constantly updates. I don't even want to look at these patients till they have surgery. and that's how I do it. Now, that may be very different than how you're set up or how your program works, and perhaps your OR schedule doesn't change as often as mine does. But so you can absolutely do it that way. The surgery date drives everything. So I wait until there is surgery, and then I start capturing. Next slide. So then the hospital course, probably our next big bulk of data, because this is where the patient's post-op recovery is occurring. Complications, extubations and reintubations, more surgeries, and you go back to having another surgery date and all those operative fields to collect. You may have more genetic testing that results, more testing in general that results. Blood products are being given, as well as you have some anesthesia fields if you are participating in the anesthesia database. Next. Then at discharge, we have even more fun. So you've got your hospital discharge onto potentially long-term care or another acute care facility. You have all the mortality fields to complete, readmission, more complications that might occur after discharge, and then of course long-term follow-up. And complications that occur after discharge, but within 30 days, if you've discharged prior to the 30th day post-op, you've still got some complications to collect. Same with readmission or mortality fields. When we start looking at long-term care, you've got patients sitting in other facilities that you're following sometimes what seems for an infinite amount of time. And so having a plan for how to collect all of these. We also have some fields that really transcend this entire trajectory, right? So the hospitalization field, someone can be hospitalized during this time period around having surgery, weeks ahead of time, the day before, the day of. COVID testing, we're collecting positive COVID tests from prior to having surgery throughout their hospital course to even post-discharge. And then of course the patient process measures. Did these things occur prior to the patient going to the OR, as in like you had a multidisciplinary discussion? But then there's some things that happen intraoperatively. Was there a TEE? How about your antibiotic timing? And then some things that happen post-operatively. Were there any major complications or mortality that occurred? So again, this transcends every piece of this time. Next slide. So now I have to take this all and look at it. That was one patient's data collection. Now, how do I do this for the 500 patients, or 500 cases, I should say, that we're going to do over the next year? So I really have to look at, what do I have do weekly, monthly, quarterly? Then obviously you can go into yearly if you're that organized and can project your time out that way. So I just did one quarter here. So I have months 1, 2, and 3 broken up by 4 weeks if everything was in my perfect world. Next slide. So what do I need to do weekly? So what we do weekly in my program is run the OR log. I don't want to run that OR log every day. I want to run it weekly. So personally for me, I like a Monday. I come in Monday morning, I'm all refreshed. I haven't been on call all weekend, and I just want to run that OR log and see what everybody else did last week, Monday through Sunday. And then I enter that pre-op and the surgical data, right? Because I need to know, and this is for the week prior. So what I say to everyone in my program is, I'm 1 week behind. I need the OR notes to populate. I need the perfusion notes to populate. And that's just something that happens in my EHR and how it is. And so for me to do it the week after is great. And for timing for my program, that's not a problem. No one is going to do a case on Monday and then ask me for that case on Tuesday, right? And so that it's just something in my workflow that I found that works for my program specifically. And then that pre-op data, so I can get, birth history and anything that I know about the patient pre-op, including the pre-op factors. This also works well for other databases that want to use all that pre-op data, syndromes and birth history and things. Then I'm not slowing the other databases down either, because all the surgical data has been entered that next week. So then what else do I do every week? I need to look at anyone who discharged, of course, all the extubation data, any reoperations that occur, and reoperations really drive much of our major complications. And so these I can get right through IT reports, super easy. If I'm running the OR log from the week prior, I'm going to find out about who had reoperations and re-interventions. I can run it for the cath lab as well. And then I can see who's discharged, because once I know who's discharged, now I want to complete the rest of your case and look at all your complications, complete the rest of the outstanding database fields for these cases. And then I have a weekly case review with my data manager who does much of this work, not me personally. And we go through anything that might be, kind of crazy, wonky. What question do we have? Does this need to go to the core group? Should we talk to the surgeons? Where does the blood go? I don't know what they did in the OR. And so we do this every Friday, just so we constantly know what's going on in our data and what we're looking at. Next slide. What's required from me monthly? So I have a surgeon report. I know he wants the first Monday or second Monday, I think it is, of every month. And this is because he takes it to his boss and hospital administration to say, here's our volume, here's our mortality rate by stat score. And so it's just some basic stuff that we've come up with. And so it's on my calendar. So it's here that I provide that monthly. I also want to upload to Iqubia regularly. I work this into our workflow that we do this about every other month. And with the Iqubia upload, it's not enough to just upload. I also then want to validate, clear any errors, look at anything in the primary procedure mismatch report. I don't want to wait until right before harvest to do all of this, or you're going to be behind. And so I try to work this into my workflow going every other month. Next slide. So then I add in what I need to do, quarterly. And so I've got patient follow-up, because remember, some people, when they discharged, I didn't have their 30 days done yet, or they transferred to another facility and I need to follow up on them. Now I can call someone monthly in all these facilities, which I'm going to drive other people nuts and probably burn some bridges. Or I can do this more quarterly. And so, in the first month of the new quarter is when I like to perform my patient follow-up. I also have some more reports to do. So some committee level reporting, quality management reporting, and things that are all driven by this database. Of course, you have ad hoc data requests, meetings, data analysis to do, harvest activities that come up as well. And I would plot those in my year graph and then ask for a raise. Next slide. So I think, as far as workflow goes, it's really dependent on you and how you want to do it. And it's where a data manager science also becomes an art. But I think you need to be very organized and consistent in your approach, knowing though that it's going to change over time. All of our needs change over time. Your program's needs change over time. STS's needs change over time. So always understanding that this will be a fluid process. And then understanding your competing priorities. You absolutely have to meet your STS deadlines. However, your boss is going to tell you absolutely have to meet your local institution priorities as well. How do you make this happen? And is this where, if you put it into like that swim lane that I showed on the previous slides, where you can say, look, to do everything that this hospital wants as well as STS needs to be a part of this database, we need some help. And perhaps when you put it in a diagram, people can really understand what it is that you do, when you do it, and how you do it, and that you need someone else to help you do it. So just kind of food for thought. I'm going to turn it over to Leslie now and for her live demo, and then we'll take questions at the end.
Yeah, thanks, Chastity. I'm going to share my screen.
Yep, I stopped sharing, Leslie, so you should be good to go.
Thank you. Let me just make sure I have the right screen. Okay. So from here, I'm hoping that you can all share my screen or see my screen. Just pipe up if you cannot.
Yep, looks good.
Okay, great. So a slide or two ago, Chastity talked about uploading to Iqubia. So that might look different depending on which software program that you use, but regardless of your vendor, you're going to create a harvest file. We often refer to that as a DAT file. You're going to create that, and then you're going to log into Iqubia, go to the upload screen, and drag your file right here. You can drag and drop it right to this screen. It will then go through uploading, checking, mapping, formatting, and validating your file. You can also choose to just navigate using this button here. So once that happens, you'll see this little white box pop up once it's successful at the bottom here. This we refer to as a card if you ever have to talk to Iqubia or IT support for what is going on with your file. The first thing I look at is to make sure I have a green check mark right here. If this is a red X, that means that my file did not upload for whatever reason, and I need to figure that out. But once you have a green check mark, the first thing I do is look over on this side to make sure that I have the number of cases that I expect to have uploaded to my file. So this is 627 cases uploaded out of 637 cases in total. And you can see here that I have a red X, a yellow X as well, and then a blue little warning symbol. those are going to be on the next screen, but this red X is really showing me that something went wrong in this upload. And if you click then on view reports, this takes you to a new summary. It opens a new tab called the data quality report. This is working a little bit slower because I'm in the testing environment than what you might see in production. But either way, you're going to get your DQR or your data quality report. That red X is this red critical error. And these critical errors mean that those files, that 10 difference, this 10 cases difference between 627 and 637 did not upload. Those are not in Iqubia. So for me, my first priority is to look at these critical errors. You can click on this pie box. You can also click on this header, but this will give you all of your critical errors here at the bottom. I like to sort these so I can see exactly what the errors are by message first, just to give myself an idea of what is going on. This one is mortality date cannot be less than discharge date. So somewhere in my file, I have the wrong dates entered. You can also sort that by patient ID. That's helpful because if you have multiple critical errors on one patient, you can kind of take care of that at one time. But the biggest point to remember on this screen is that these critical errors need to be resolved before you go on to any other reports or messaging within the Iqubia system. So you'll go to each one of these, look it up by patient or surgery, and fix the error. You can also sort on this side, critical errors, just your op types 1 and 2, which you know is the meat and potatoes of our database, or just others if you feel like it. For our purposes with congenital, errors and warnings are kind of the same. If you were doing direct data entry, which none of our congenital sites do at the moment, errors would mean that your file is not saved, and those need to be handled before you can go on to the next reports. But right now, for our purposes, we need to fix the critical errors, go back and re-download all of your data, and then re-upload. I do look at these as well, just to kind of see what's going on. My age is incorrect. I'm going to look at those patients, make sure that I have the correct age in days or date of birth, surgery date entered correctly. Warnings, as you can see here, as my status at 365 days is not complete, but it should be. I might not know, or my demographics version might be out of date. We will get into those a little bit later on. So first thing, fix the critical errors, go back, reharvest your data, and then go back to the uploader screen, pull that file over and re-upload. Once you do that, you'll want to go to operational reports here on the left side of your screen. Now, this is personal preference, but for me, having done this for a little while now, I like to look first at this primary procedure mismatch and mortality eligibility summary. You'll pull that up and pick your current harvest, and then you will run the report. The first screen you will see is your primary procedure mismatch summary. So unfortunately, I don't think there's any errors in this file, but what you would see is if you have entered in your local data a primary procedure that doesn't agree with what the algorithm is according to STS of what your primary procedure should be. So if you're unaware, there is a file out on the STS site, this determination of primary diagnosis and primary procedure. This is, of course, talking about the primary procedure, and it goes into all of these different rules and exceptions for how you pick your primary procedure. That is covered really well in our first webinar, so please go back and review that if you have questions. This down here would show you individual cases where what you've entered at your site doesn't match what STS thinks your primary procedure should be. And while it isn't required that you make those match every time, it is helpful so that when you look at your reports after analysis, you know exactly what procedure was analyzed. So I like to clear those up first, and then again, resubmit and look at my data once more. The next thing I look at is op type 1 and 2 case eligibility summary. This is where you're going to find out whether or not you're eligible to get back an analyzed report after harvest, after it gets sent off and all of your data is analyzed. The easiest way I think to go about this is to click on whichever time period you're looking for, and then unclick eligible so that at the bottom, you're only seeing your ineligible cases. And this will tell you exactly why they're ineligible. So for instance, on these first couple patients, I don't have a hospital discharge or a database discharge. Now, if I had clicked the box that said the patient is still in the hospital, those would appear in my numbers, but not appear as ineligible because of course I shouldn't have that data. So the first thing I'm going to do is look at those two patients. If they're still in the hospital, I'm going to ensure that that box is checked, that they're still in-house, and then I'll move on to my 30-day status. You can export this report by right-clicking, exporting, and getting yourself an Excel table, which is a little bit easier for me to manage. And then I like to save that Excel labeled with the current harvest date. And then I have that as my kind of secondary source for if I'm making phone calls or looking in different medical records or Care Everywhere for that information. As you know, you have to be within under 2% for missing or unknown to be eligible. So I work on this report until I'm under 2% before I move on to anything else. Again, I go back, resubmit, re-upload, and rerun the reports. Once those two reports are kind of cleaned up, I will go back to my operational reports and work on another report. So the next one I like to look at is the missing variable report. This one looks at, I forgot I have to put in my date ranges, sorry. This report will look at all missing data, but it does not take into account any of the logic, like I mentioned, that patient still in house box. This is just simply looking at what is missing from your data. Give this a moment to load. Need some Jeopardy music, Leanne.
It's like do 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 do.
Yeah.
Happy to sing for you guys.
Yes,
if
please
you really
sing because it's not coming up.
And I might need to. It's the fear when you give a live demo and you're using a testing environment.
Yeah.
This is like your worst nightmare.
Like
So
I said,
you might be able to
it is a little
refresh.
slower.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Let me just, we'll try one more time before I'll try to use the buttons instead of typing in. Oh, well, actually, this is a good thing. So index operations only, I personally look at all. So I say no to index operations only, just to get kind of a first look. There it goes. You can, of course, look at index operations only, knowing that that's what's analyzed. So especially if you're short on time, look at index first, make sure that you have everything taken care of for those analyzed cases. And then if there's time, go back. Give this just a moment. I'll point out on the left side here, it'll tell you again your date range. So I set this for our most current harvest, which goes through June 30th. It's already set to filter on all fields. And then I'll show you in just a moment once the data pops up, the different filters here on the side. Oh my goodness.
That's okay. Like you said, do, 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 do.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay, so back when I talked about the warnings and errors that could come up on your DQR, one of the things that I mentioned was that your demographics table might not match, or it might be outdated or not match your surgical event. Right here in the middle of the screen, you can see these APGAR scores, 1 and 5 minutes, and that they're missing. Sometimes when we add new fields to the database, they're based on the demographic version. So these might look missing, and I might look at my local data and say, no, they're there, but Iqubia or DCRI eventually is not getting the data because I haven't updated that table. So those sometimes are just pesky, and you need to be really aware of those things that come up. But otherwise, generally speaking, this is going to be a table of every single variable in your database that is missing information it expects to see. And you can kind of scroll through here. You can prioritize it for however your program likes to prioritize. But what I personally like to do is first look at mortality. And I see this mortality 30-day status. So I need to go back and look at these 25 patients and figure out, do I have that in there? Did I forget to go back and reharvest and resubmit? So maybe Iqubia doesn't have the latest snapshot, or do I really not know about these patients? Again, you can sort on event, you can sort on patient, you can sort on surgical year if it, of course, is over multiple years, if that's how you like to prioritize. Go back, update all of these things that you can resubmit. After mortality, I'll click on risk model. Maybe. Yep. And then same thing. You'll get whatever variables are in the risk model that are missing from your data. It'll show you here. I click on the box. It'll tell me which exact patients and operations are missing that data. So I use the operation ID or the patient ID to go back and fill in the data. If you're an anesthesia participant, you can click on the anesthesia filter. And again, it'll give you the anesthesia fields that are missing from your data. You can go back, fill it in, resubmit. You can also sort here again, if you weren't just picking index, actually, even if you were picking index operations, you can sort by op types 1 and 2 or other. Op type 1 and 2, of course, is our cardiac cases, CPB, or no CPB cardiovascular. Other is every other case type. Okay.
Leslie, before you move on real quick, since you have the screen up, Dave had a question regarding the blue hyperlink over to the right. I know he was referring to, I think, when you were going through another report earlier, but he had just asked what that blue hyperlink, what is that? What does that do? Yeah.
Okay. So because I'm in a test environment and I'm not exactly sure what data got carried over, I don't want to click on it. But if you did, it would show you essentially online a case form. So it would be like a data collection form, but electronically. And you can go to and see exactly what field is missing if you were unaware, given the short name or the name of the field.
Right. And also, I'm sorry, I just wanted to clarify, even though, you can click on that and it'll bring up the case form, Dave. So you can see what was, what's entered for that patient on that case form. You cannot, if you see anything that's missing or anything like that, you can't update it within the Iqubia platform via that case form. You need to update whatever's missing in your database and extract a file and resubmit that to Iqubia to clean up any missing data.
This would just be for direct data enterers if we had them.
Right. Yeah, and we don't have any for congenital, so.
Okay.
Correct. I hope that helps, Dave.
Okay, so once you've gone through those data pieces in your missing variable report, you can go back out to operational reports. So like I said, I like to look at primary procedure mismatch and eligibility first, then I go to MVR. Next, I go to harvest summary report. Same thing, you will put in your date range. Oops. And run this report. This is going to show you a picture of what Iqubia has currently for the harvest. So this is sort of in my opinion, my last look before I'm ready to submit for harvest. And this again is those errors and warnings. So like I had mentioned, this came up in our first DQR. Had I taken care of these would have hopefully been gone. And your warnings, again, your 365, and I think this is where the demographic data came up to. But this is sort of the last look of what they're getting before you are done or kind of sign off on your harvest. And then the Chsd participant summary, you can filter. I did the same harvest for just ease. I'll do all age groups and not just index only. And run this report. And again, this is going to kind of give you a different slice, a different peek at your data. These two particular reports I personally run sort of at the end when I'm almost finished with everything, but that's going to end up being your personal preference. You might look at one of these and just really find this more useful early on in your kind of harvesting. I'll give this just a minute. Leanne can sing for us again.
Sorry, guys. See, it works every time. Immediately.
Perfect. Okay, so this is going to go by section of the data collection form, and it'll show you, I mean, just sort of how things work out, of course, but I like to scroll through here and look for missing. So I kind of scroll through, I don't have any missing patient sex, I don't have any missing prematurity. I'll click on NCAA, chromosomal and abnormal or syndromes, I'm sorry, as well. Make sure I don't have any missing. These are important for the risk model, so I like to look at them multiple different times within my submission. Pre-op factors, again, in the risk model, I'll make sure they're not missing. Diagnoses, if you didn't have a primary diagnosis, some vendors allow you to pick and choose a primary, some is just kind of based on the order in which you enter it. If you were a vendor that you had to pick one, this would tell you if you're missing diagnoses or you just simply didn't add them. Same thing for procedures. VAD procedures, if you were missing anything kind of in that breakout box, you can go in and check here. Complications. I know Chastity talked a little bit about when you enter complications. Are you doing that sort of all along throughout the admission? Do you do that after discharge? Our program does complications once a week at our mortality and morbidity review, but if a patient just didn't have any complications and I hadn't entered any, but they were still in-house, I would check this to make sure that I hadn't missed anything or forgotten to enter none in that table. And then discharge and readmission will break down again how many cases you've entered or anything missing. On each one of these reports, I also like to eyeball and make sure that I have the right number of cases. I think that might just be my own brain being a little nitpicky, but just in case the data didn't quite slice out the way I think it should, I double check on every single one that my total number of cases match. Okay, I think we've gone through all of the reports that we can. Of course, this last one, the risk adjusted dashboard, is where you'll find your analyzed reports after you've submitted and the reports have been published. I think, can't figure out how to not share anymore.
If you go, let's see here. There should be stop share if you go to your Zoom. I think I can stop it, Leslie. Let me see. Share
Will
screen.
you try? Because
Yep,
I
I
don't
can
know
stop
where
it.
my Zoom even went. Okay.
Yep, I can stop it.
Thanks.
No problem. All right. All right. Thank you, Leslie and Chastity. Greatly appreciate it. That was a phenomenal presentation. We do have about 20 minutes left for questions. So I wanted to take this opportunity for all of our new data managers, anyone joining today, if you have any questions whatsoever, whether it pertains to the information that was presented today, something as simple as, understanding the data collection form, anything like that you're not sure about or not sure where to find something on the STS website, where, how to use, I don't know, anything. So this is your opportunity to ask us questions, whatever you may have. Chastity, Leslie are phenomenal resources. So just if you have questions about AQO, happy to answer those here. Emily's on the call as well. So speaking of AQO, if our new data managers have not yet registered for AQO, if you're able to go, highly recommend AQO, Advances in Quality and Outcomes. It is our one conference that we have yearly that is for data managers and data managers. It's created for you. We have surgeon presenters, your colleagues are presenting. It's the #1 location to go get your education for the STS National Database. So if you have any questions about AQO, we're happy to answer those as well. So there is one question, Leslie, that Dave had. I think you were in the beginning when you were talking about the critical errors and fixing those. He asked, did you say that after a critical error is fixed, you downloaded the data, or I don't know what?
Yeah.
Yep. So if you could, expand on that.
Because when you get those critical errors, that means that data has not made it over to the Iqubia platform. Essentially, you uploaded it, but there's something so wrong that it won't accept the file. So yes, go through your critical errors, fix all of those, and then rerun your harvest file or your DAT file and re-upload to Iqubia. Make sure you do not have any critical errors, and then move on to the operational report so that you know all of your cases are going to be represented in those other reports.
Awesome. Thank you, Leslie.
Sure.
Also, while we're waiting for some additional questions to come in, also, if you don't want to type your question, you can also use the raise hand function. If you have a question for us, just you can raise your hand and I'm happy to unmute you. You'll just need to make sure that your microphone is enabled, and you can then you're able to just talk to us as well. So we welcome any of your feedback and your comments, questions. We're here to chat. So but while we're waiting for more questions to come in, I wanted to point out that Emily did put a link in the chat box to AQO. So the AQO website on the AQO page on the STS website. So that link is in the chat box. Also, earlier at the beginning of the webinar, I had put a link in to the STS YouTube page where you can go back and reference the 2021 New Data Manager webinar. That would be very helpful and beneficial to you guys as well if you've not already checked that out. All right. Our first question, let's see, to register for AQO, you have to have access to the STS website, correct? I'm waiting to receive my login information, but have gotten the Iqubia login. So let me go here. I don't know, Emily, if you want to, I don't know, is Emily still on? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that what you can do, it'll just like create a new that's a good question, Ashley. I'm going to put the contact information for our meetings and conventions manager in the chat here. Her name's Elisa Robles, and she handles these questions. You can email meetings@sts.org. And I'll put that here in the chat.
Okay, perfect. And also, sorry, I just navigated out. If you just a quick little tour of the STS website. From the STS homepage, if you want to find the information for AQO, just click on STS National Database. And if you scroll down, you can click on Advances in Equality and Outcomes, and all AQO information can be found here on this page. Pricing, hotel info, COVID information, questions, links to contact Emily, and registration, the meetings department. If you need a justification letter for the conference, that can also be accessed here. Schedule at a glance, the agenda, all things AQO can be found here on this AQO page on the website. Okay. Is the login for AQO the same for STS website? Oh, a login for Iqubia the same for STS website? No, those are two different things. So you would get your STS information, and then the Iqubia, your login for Iqubia would not necessarily match the two. That's my understanding. Okay, from Jen, I've got quite a list of primary procedure mismatches again. I feel like I clean them up with every harvest and then it changes again with the next harvest. Can you please explain why ASD common atrium septation stat 2 is supposed to be the primary procedure over an aortic arch repair plus VSD repair stat 4? Which rule?
Yeah,
I can take this, Leanne. Jen, you're looking at the old stat scores, and remember we're to be looking at the new stat scores. And so if you look, aortic arch plus VSD repair was a stat category 4, but in the new stat categories, this will now be a stat category 2, whereas your ASD common atrium septation is moving from a stat category 2 to a stat category 3. So that's why there's a mismatch, and the report is asking you to reorder those. You probably are seeing a high number of maybe not high number, but a number of mismatches with this harvest, and that's because the stat scores have updated. So the report is saying, hey, and you didn't have them before because per the old stat scores, they were correct. But with the application of new stat scores, you probably have a number that you have to change. So personally, in my 4-year file, I had 60, 65 to change. And so depending on how large your program is, or if you do in number procedures that were impacted by the stat score changes, you'll have these to do. And so I would think, other than stat score changes, or perhaps if new rule changes come about, you shouldn't see, you know, a lot of new ones pop up that don't make sense. It's just with the changes, you will have ones that pop up. So it looks like that answered your question. Great.
Thank you. I don't know if Leslie's back yet. I'm not sure.
I think she is.
Okay.
Yep.
Did you, I know you had said you had wanted to answer Ella's question. Did I answer that right? The login
So that's
for
right.
Iqubia?
Yep, they're different logins.
Yep, different. Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right.
And Leslie, do you want to speak to, there were many questions that came in, I typed answers, but just to say it to the group, do you want to speak to the Iquvia reports do not apply any analysis logic, so therefore you're missing,
Correct.
does include your patients?
Right. So the only report that takes in any kind of logic is that one field where I talked about, sorry, I already closed my screen, but the field where you can say that your patient is still in hospital, it shows up in your N, in your number of patients, but it won't appear as ineligible because it doesn't expect to have a discharge date if they're still in house. Otherwise, in every other report, the data has not gone through analysis, so it only knows, hey, these things are missing, so take a look. You still do have to know which of your patients are in house, which of your patients are in long-term care or maybe at a different facility. And I personally keep a separate spreadsheet, but that's a lot of work for many programs. So you just really have to look at it and know exactly where your patients are for each harvest period.
Right. And also, I just wanted to point out, just a friendly reminder, the inclusion criteria for the mortality threshold calculation, all of that specific criteria is found out on the in the CHSD analysis overview. And that information is found within the library. So the analysis report overview, you can download this document. I've already got it downloaded, so I'm just going to pull it over. And I know Chastity did cover this in the webinar, was it day before yesterday? We had touched on this. So the fields used for the mortality calculation, as well as the determination of eligibility for inclusion in mortality analysis, the rules and the criteria, the determination are laid out here in the analysis overview in great detail. And I know we have the number one question, what we were just discussing was regarding missing mortality status at database discharge. There is this table in the analysis overview that explains, that helps kind of lay out if your mortality status at database discharge is unknown or missing, and the database discharge date is missing, it's not populated, then those records would not be included in the population, nor would they count as missing. So again, Chastity, they go through, provided probably a much better explanation than I just did regarding having missing mortality status at database discharge and whether or not that counts against you in the mortality thresholds. What else? Okay,
I can take,
yeah.
oh, sorry.
No,
Patricia's question about
Mhm.
facility and its name. So facilities have designations as to whether they're considered like a rehab facility or acute care facility and such. And so you really have to understand what that facility is. There's not a list out there that says this is an acute care facility or this is a long-term care facility. And so you have to kind of know what's available in your area and what those facilities are. So you're calling this an LTAC, a long-term acute care facility. So in my mind, when I look at that, I think of it as more acute than like a chronic care facility. In which case, if it's acute care, then there isn't a 183-day rule for that. Now, if locally it's really determined because this is a long-term center, it's not really providing acute care, but it really is more chronic care, long-term patients, you know, stay there and whatever, then perhaps the 183-day rule does apply. And so you need to understand what the facility designation is. Truly, is LTAC what you call it kind of colloquially, or is it really considered, you know, LTAC, and looking into that. But there are patients that bounce back and forth. For example, I have one that is probably 2.5 years now that has not database discharged because they keep coming back from a long-term care facility. They get to like 179 days and come back. And so I understand that this rule, it can be painful. It doesn't occur in high numbers, but as a data manager, it drives you nuts. And so you have to, you know, you can go to the facility's website, perhaps call the facility, maybe talk to your case managers. They always know what the facilities are designated because they're helping getting patients transferred to those to understand what a facility is.
Awesome. Thank you, Chastity. My next question from Jen. Can you make a request to Iqubia to not automatically log us out so quickly? I'm working from my exported Excel files and get back to Iqubia to fill out. I have to log back in. Maybe make it a 20-minute lag time. 30 would be better. Yeah, sure. We can absolutely share that feedback with Iqubia. I don't know. Yeah, we can share that feedback with them. I don't know if that's doable, or if it's like how the program works. I don't know.
It may be Iqubia, but it can also be your own site. I know I have different automatic logouts based on security at my own hospital. It doesn't matter what the vendors, you know, do for websites. My own hospital will close me out of those sites. So it could also be a local issue.
But yeah, Jen, happy to share that feedback with them. Marina, is there a reason why 2 of the changes I made to my primary procedures 2018 did not show as changed after I fixed them and reran my harvest file? It still shows me the mismatch. Marina, I think that's something you'll have to submit a ticket with Iqubia for, and they'll have to look into it. I honestly don't know the answer to that question. I think they'll have to look into it on their end. Sorry, we're unable to assist with that one. Could it be because they are from version 3.3? I don't think that would have any impact.
Yeah, I don't think so, but I would send it to Iqubia.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's something Iqubia will have to look at. Chastity, Leslie, for data extraction, who is the contact for bypass graft inquiries and valves?
If you have a question regarding the procedure or valves and things, you're welcome to submit it to the core group, submit an FAQ, and we can discuss that. If that's what you're asking about a contact.
Yeah, just let us know, Ella. I do not understand the mismatch report. For example, the primary procedure entered is conduit reoperation. STS primary procedure description is RVOT procedure. Am I supposed to change the primary procedure?
Okay, the primary procedure mismatch report applies the logic of determining the primary procedure, and it essentially is saying you, in all likelihood, have the wrong primary procedure listed as primary based on the rules. And so based on your example, I'm assuming what you have entered is conduit reop, and then the secondary procedure as RVOT procedure. RVOT procedure perhaps has a higher stat score than the conduit reop, and therefore it will be considered the primary procedure. The expectation is that you would use this report and reorder your primary procedures based on that. If you choose not to, you don't have to, but if you choose not to, upon analysis, DCRI is going to only analyze the RVOT procedure since that is the designated primary procedure. So even if you choose to keep it as conduit reop in your local data, what will get analyzed is the RVOT procedure. So that way the analysis occurs the same across the board for all of us, even if we chose not to apply the rules to our local data file. I know that this is probably a very simple explanation, and if we need to set up some time to chat further about the primary procedure mismatch report, we're happy to do that.
All right. Leslie mentioned the APGAR scores that were entered but not recognized by Iqubia because it's in an earlier version. My versions are all current, but I have the same issue with PVR. Is this a concern? Is there a fix? I've submitted this question to Iqubia several times, but they seem uninterested in addressing it.
Hey, Kim, it's Leslie.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think PVR, assuming it's pulmonary vascular resistance, not pulmonary valve replacement, is that has a different parent as well, I think based on weight or maybe age.
It's weight, Leslie, you're absolutely correct.
Weight.
Yeah.
So that might be part of it if your vendor allows you to enter either unit. But if that's not the issue, I would say either to submit it as an FAQ or unfortunately, again, submit it as a ticket to Iqubia, because I have not heard of that one before. We enter PVRs and I haven't seen any errors, but.
Yeah, Kim, if you've already submitted that to Iqubia and you haven't gotten a response, if you could please forward me that email or your ticket that you submitted, just please forward that to me. I'll put my email address, which I'm sorry, I don't have it on the slides. I'll be sure and put my contact information in the slide deck for posting on the website. So I apologize. So there's my email address. Kim, if you could just forward that initial ticket that you submitted to me, and I will follow up with Iqubia since you've not gotten a response. And she said the field is grayed out. It is for thoracic, etc.
Yeah, it should accept it for thoracic. That's one of the case types. So I would, send it to Leanne so we can look into it further.
Yeah, please. And then Ella was just responding to your question. She was like, yes, and how to input it into the registry.
Ella, there are procedures that cover cabbages. And then you would go into the separate cabbage section in your software and answer the questions. But if you have questions about which procedure to select or how to answer those cabbage questions, if you didn't do a cabbage, you would answer no. And if you didn't do a valve procedure, you would answer no in those sections. And so if you want to submit your questions to the FAQ, we can definitely take a look and give you more specific guidance.
Perfect. And since we're here and I'm already sharing my screens, if you're not familiar with how to submit an FAQ, you would just go out to the STS website, click on the STS National Database page, and scroll down to Clinical Question Request Form, click Ask a Question, and just fill out this information here, and it will go directly to the FAQ mailbox, which Chastity, thank goodness, mans and answers all of those questions for us. I don't see, we've got like 1 more minute left, but I don't see any more questions. But one thing I did want to point out for those of you that are new and are not familiar with where all of the resources are located. Today, we've talked about, the primary procedure mismatch. We've talked about the primary procedure determination document, as well as the new stat scores versus the old stat scores. I just wanted to show you where out on the STS website you can go to find this documentation and print, put it up in your cube, put it in your office, whatever. If you go to the website, click on the congenital heart surgery page, click on version 341. If you scroll down, you will see additional resources. Here you'll find the Appendix C stats, stat categories. It's in a PDF version as well as an Excel version. I'm going to pull the Excel version off. We put the Excel version on here so you could sort, filter however you like. But again, we give the harvest code, the procedure name, the stat mortality score. These white columns are the old stat mortality scores. These yellow columns are the new updated stat scores that are now being implemented and will be used in this fall 22 analysis that closes next week on September the 16th. So you have this information here. And again, we have it in Excel and PDF form. So you can manipulate it however you like, whatever works best for you. Also, we have the rules to determine primary diagnosis and primary procedure. That document is located here. And again, it lists all the rules on how primary procedure and primary diagnosis are determined. We also have the STS combination procedure document, which has been updated as well. So this lists all the current combination procedures. This document does not include the new 5,000 codes that are coming out with the next data version. So that information is out on the STS website. All right. So we have, all right, Ella said she will do. All right, perfect. Okay, well, we are a few minutes over. I just wanted to tell Chastity and Leslie, thank you so much for amazing presentation today. if you did not get a chance, or if you've not seen last year's new data manager webinar, highly recommend you go out on the STS website, our YouTube channel, and take a listen to last year's new data manager webinar. It contains a little bit more information from the one we walked through today. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to me directly. I can be reached at ljones@sts.org. I'll be sure, again, to include all of my contact information in the slide deck for posting on the STS website. All right. So thank you, Chastity, Leslie. I appreciate it. Emily, thanks for joining. Carol, thanks for joining. I hope you guys have a great rest of the day, and hopefully this was helpful to our new data managers. Again, please do not hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions. We're here to help you in any way possible. We know this database is extremely complicated and can be extremely overwhelming, and we don't want you out there struggling. So again, please don't hesitate to reach out to us for help. That's what we're here for. All right. All right, Leslie, thank you guys. Thanks for joining. I hope you guys have a great rest of the day.